Hello and welcome to DungeonCast, news and discussion from across the tabletop. Today on our third episode around the DM Roundtable, learning about campaign settings, how to build a campaign, we are going to be talking about system, rules and story. On our previous episodes, we've looked at how to approach building your campaign, adventure hooks and other such things. The links for those episodes are below. If you haven't seen them, pop over to those and have a look. We hope you enjoy this episode and we hope you can like this, comment below if there are any questions you have or any points that you think you disagree with us. That's fine.
You're wrong.
And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can keep abreast of all the things we're doing. We've got role-playing actual plays, we've got card game shows going, and we've got this with the guys. So we've got Ben and Rich in the dungeon again, here to talk through all things role-playing.
Indeed.
Cool. So this time around, we're going to talk about system and rules first. And I think, Rich, you had some thoughts on this around matching it to your campaign.
Yeah, definitely. Having the right rule set for your campaign is quite important, especially if you want to involve things like magic, if you're doing fantasy stuff, if you're doing futuristic sci-fi stuff, if it's going to be psychic powers, people using the Force. Make sure you've got a rule set that covers the abilities you want people to be able to have.
Sure.
There's nothing worse than getting into a campaign where you want people to be able to throw fireballs, cast lightning bolts, and then finding out that the rule mechanics for it make it clumsy and difficult for your players. That takes away the immersion of the story. You want something that's a nice, easy, accessible system for the things you want your players and your characters to be able to do within your story.
Yeah,
I think that's...
No, I agree. A lot of the published role-playing games are often matched with a fairly obvious setting type and mood. Star Wars, heroic, science fiction. Star Trek, slightly different.
Or vary when you get into looking at the sort of power differences in certain things. So while you might have your sort of standard characters in Star Wars and Star Trek are fairly well balanced, when you look into the balance between Jedi and psychic powers in Star Trek, there's a vast difference in power levels. Star Trek has sort of two power levels, low and godlike. And there's no real middle ground between the two. It's one or the other. Whereas in Star Wars, you've got your progression with the Jedi from low to high power over time. So if you're looking at running the difference between those two games, Star Wars means you can progress magic using characters. Star Trek, you can't really.
No.
Yeah, and also on that, using a rule system that fits what you want to do. Don't feel too railroaded by the definition and the idea of the system when it's created. If you think a Star Wars system is going to fit your sci-fi campaign better than Star Trek, even though you're setting it in a more Star Trek type universe, use the Star Wars system. It gives you the tools you need to play your story.
Yeah, if there's a certain aspect about a set of rules that you really like and it matches what you want to do with your setting, then there's no reason why you can't adopt that, even if it seems slightly strange. You know, you could use Dungeons and Dragons for heroic sci-fi games if you wanted to, and just reskin
contemporary games as well.
Yep.
You can use the moving away from the magic and psychic powers Force use ideas. If you want to do a contemporary setting or a Wild West setting, but you like the combat mechanics on 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons or on Pathfinder, use that, because that system works well. And if you find that's nice and fluid and lets you deal with combat situations well, which really your rules are a vehicle for telling your story, not the other way around. Your story's not a vehicle for using your rules.
One of the things that always sort of throws me is item creation rules in Dungeons and Dragons. It's such a fast-paced, action-heavy game that throwing in item creation feats for magic users just almost spokes the wheel of the story completely. I've seen games where going to go and fight a fire dragon up in the mountains. Right, well, let's stop for 3 weeks so I can turn out a quiver full of ice arrows.
Yeah.
So it's one of the first things I will always scrap in any.
You did in the last game I played of yours.
Yeah. Item creation feats straight out the window in any Dungeons and Dragons game that I do. I reserve them for high level NPCs because I want magic to be something that is usable, but I want magic items to be something that is found rather than made.
Yeah.
I want them to have more meaning than just just a utility item that you can churn out.
It's a storytelling device.
Yeah,
exactly. Where you can bring that back in, even in your example, is if one of your players turns around and says, "Actually, I'm away for a month with work or whatever. I want my character to do something meaningful. We know where the plot is headed."
Yeah.
Then he can go off and do something.
That's
he can
true.
go off and craft some magical item which explains why he's absent.
Yeah.
The rest of the story progresses and he comes back. But it shouldn't be something that's holding up the entire plot.
No, exactly.
Because your example there, that fire dragon, he's still roaming around.
Burning villages.
Decimating the.
Do you need a full quiver? Do you really need a full quiver of ice arrows?
Do you even need
one?
You're going to fight a fire dragon. Why have you not got one already?
Yeah. So it's about fitting it in. That's what you keep in and what you throw away from a rule set.
Yeah, I think
it's really important.
It's well worth getting rid of anything that is going to detract from the story that you're telling. So if there's a story that you're telling and you want it to be heroic, but there's some kind of monster that you really want to use, but it has an ability that would de-heroize the characters. So either a fear aura that makes them all run away, that they can't overcome, or an ability to drain them of their special powers, or weaken them in some way that would reduce level drain. It's a prime example. Hate me some level drain. I don't like level drain. Temporary fine.
Yes.
Permanent no.
Same with stat drain as well.
Reducing
someone's statistics permanently on their character, unless it's as a story device. If a character's lost an arm or a leg as part of a story, then their stats should probably reflect that.
But it's a horrible drain on the character.
Certainly losing a leg is going to affect how fast they run.
Yes, and it's that's true. And if it's something like that, then that's allowable. But if you permanently drain levels or stats from a character, you're really putting them at a disadvantage to all the rest.
Well, especially when you consider that those levels that they've gained, they've spent weeks or even months building those levels up, and then along comes one monster that just goes, "Nah, you haven't got all that anymore." It just snatches it away. It's like all that work that you put in is just gone for nothing. And the same with permanent stat drain. Once your stats are permanently drained, you're no longer playing the character you created.
Precisely.
You created a character with a purpose and a vision in mind. Having that taken away, in the short term, for story purposes, absolutely worthwhile. If you can turn your heroically strong barbarian into a quivering weakling for a little while, hilarious.
For a short period of time.
Brilliant to do
a session or two
for that character to learn and grow.
On the flip side, as you said, as a consequence of something specific, then that's fine. When I was about 15, played in a second ed AD&D game, and I had a swashbuckler, and I think he got resurrected 2 or 3 times because we were going up against some really horrible things. And in that system, when you got resurrected, you lost 1 point of constitution permanently.
That's fine. That makes sense.
Yes, and that happened about 3 times. So he turned into a bit of a weakling, but for a reason. And that was fine. I accepted that. If it's that kind of thing, then
that's
fine.
1 point lost. Each time you effectively die, which is a fairly significant event.
Fair trade.
But losing all 3 of those because something went like that is a completely different story.
Absolutely. But and it's not just around things like level drain. If you find a system that you think this matches really well to the setting that I'm building up, all the things we've talked about in the previous episodes, but you go, this one rule, it doesn't really fit. Just take it out. As long as it doesn't destabilize the entire system.
It's the GM's golden rule, isn't it? You take out what doesn't work for you.
I changed 5th edition inspiration rules. I don't like the fact that you get another D20 because it's the same as advantage. So I give smaller versions of a bardic inspiration instead, and say, here you go, have a D3 or a D4, and you can use it when you want to.
Exactly. You may find that certain classes aren't appropriate for the setting you've created. If you've created a setting where there are no wizards or there's no sorcerers or no clerics, take that class out completely. That's fine. Remove those bits of rules, but have that conversation with your players early on.
Absolutely, that's key.
So they're not coming up with a concept for a character. You haven't got a player turn up to make their character saying, excellent,
wizard.
So I want to play a half-orc paladin, and you go, that's great, there's no half-orcs and there's no paladins.
Yeah.
How do you feel about being a human fighter?
Yeah.
And they go, well, pretty rubbish, actually, because that's not what I came up with.
I'll go home.
Yeah. Well, I did a Star Wars game, and I spent ages trying to cut an arm off of one of the characters. Well, any of the characters, really. They were all Jedi. Well, I felt it was an important part of the Star Wars story that someone loses a hand.
Tradition.
It's a tradition that needed to be upheld, And I finally managed to do it, and one of the players brought to my attention a rule that I didn't know existed, because I'd never considered the second wind rules. I'd not heard of them, and I'd obviously glossed over them when reading the rules, and brought them up, and I felt sort of backed into a corner and kind of went, oh, okay then, and let it ride. But what I should have said was, no, I'm not having that rule at the time, and just sort of done away with it completely.
That's actually quite an important point. You'll often find, if you're playing a game system with a group of more experienced players, that there will be one or two players who potentially know the rule set better than you, or at least a particular aspect of it,
or the ones that are associated with their character,
or the ones that are associated with their class. Talk about it, resolve it in that session, give them a resolution in the session. Don't get held up. Don't let your session get held up over one rules debate. Make a ruling, talk about it afterwards, and set how it's going to be going forward. That's something you can both agree on.
That's a really good point.
Because otherwise, you'll keep butting heads with a particular player over a particular rule, over something that actually, let's be fair, that no one turns up to a roleplay session to roll dice.
No.
You turn up for a roleplay session, and rolling dice is part of that.
It's role-playing, not role-playing.
Exactly. It's an age-old thing, isn't it? We should be role playing and not just
sacrifice
rules.
Dice to story. It's something that I've noticed role playing with kids a lot. They love rolling dice. What do I have to roll for that? Nothing. You're just talking to a person. But what do I have to roll? Well, you don't have to roll anything. It's not always essential to roll. I actually quite enjoy diceless gaming. These days, it's something that I think you need to be quite experienced to be able to run with. But I've enjoyed diceless games or alternate techniques.
I like having the randomizer in there. So I wouldn't necessarily opt to pick a diceless game, but there are lots of sessions I've run which are diceless. And you don't need to roll any dice.
Multiple sessions in a row can go without the roll of a single dice. Because they're very plot driven and interactions rather than combat driven. And there's no element of randomness, or because something's particularly well planned, and therefore they don't need to randomize that situation. Or if it's an espionage type environment, and they've planned very well how they're going to infiltrate a particular setting. Then actually, if it's well planned, they don't need to roll dice for it. They put the time in and the preparation in, rather than having to subject themselves to the vagaries of a dice roll.
I quite like the systems that use a more thematic randomizer as well. So Deadlands with its poker chips and hands of cards. That's a fantastic mechanic.
Savage Worlds as well.
Gets you more into the game that you're playing because it makes you feel more Old West. So I did a steampunk homebrew setting which used playing cards once, and it helped the players be more immersed in the game because it felt like they were their characters more, even when they were doing the randomizer. And it was effectively like a buy-in. If you wanted to succeed at a thing, depending on what you had in your hand, you could play a card to buy up the skill. So most of them could achieve a basic level of skill, but when they wanted something more difficult, they would have to buy in with a card from their hand, and that really helped to keep the players immersed in what was going on with the game at the time. While at the same time providing a random element. So that level of flexibility and system, I think, needs to be quite prominent in your mind as a GM. If you're going to run a game, you need to be prepared to juggle things around.
And one of the cool things about rules as well that we talked about briefly before this is have a GM screen. We talked about character death in a previous session. Have a GM screen. It's the only way to guarantee that character deaths only happen when you want them to.
It's also a handy way to keep notes on it and those rules that you may have forgotten a table or a chart or something. But
also key dice rolls that they need to pass or fail for the development of a story. It's much better if your players aren't scrutinising those to the same extent.
Yeah, I always use the screen. I'll try to as much as I can if there's some impromptu.
We in no way advocate fudging dice rolls.
Yeah. No, don't do it, kids.
Yeah, because you also get the flip side where you keep rolling. You could just roll crap for every adversary they come across, and it's a cakewalk for the party.
Your overpowering physical encounter that you've set up to
slips on a banana peel and falls down the left.
Suddenly becomes a series of ones that never ends. Becomes laughable.
You don't want your scary army of ninjas to basically all be moving around like they've just fallen out of a clown car.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's
So that's
using your dice rolls for keeping things appropriate.
Yeah. So you want to have a bit of flexibility. You want to pick the right system for your setting to begin with. Often they're coupled in picking up a book. You want to figure out what you want to keep in it, what you want to get rid of, and make sure you're role playing and not role playing, because that can get slow down sessions.
Touch on is make sure you use all of those tools. We touched on it briefly with using force powers potentially to represent people being psychic.
Yep.
So reskinning things. If you're doing a campaign setting where there's no orcs.
Yep. Yeah, as I said to my players, I said you will fight orcs. They just won't be called orcs and they won't look like orcs. I've got different monsters in my world,
but they're great for challenge rating 1 encounters that you need to fill up.
Yes, exactly. You just take a monster from the monster manual and you, in your mind, cross the name off. Same set of abilities, pretty much what you want that creature to do. You can just rename that, reskin it, and the same with lots of other aspects of the games.
Yeah, definitely reskinning it. You don't have to call it a paladin. You don't have to call it a cleric.
Yeah.
You don't have to call it a sorcerer, or you can reskin things. Same with races as well. If you want to change things up a bit, you may not want to have dwarves, but you could have Vikings who are particularly hardy and weathered and therefore more resilient.
Yeah, because a player might want to play that kind of character, but you don't necessarily have dwarves, but you have something that's very similar and has similar capabilities.
I mean, you could play an all-human game, but each of the different races of humans represent the aspect that is covered by elves and dwarves and gnomes and halflings in one way or another. And so you make it more about nationality and less about species.
Yeah, like in Middle-earth role-playing, the human race, there was a lot. They had all the different regions. They had different attribute modifiers, and different bonuses and skills.
Yeah, exactly. So you'd have
in was it Forgotten Realms?
Yeah,
Forgotten Realms playbook. There's different abilities available to different human
regions.
Iron Kingdom does that as well, which is the roleplay setting for all of the privateer press stuff.
Yep.
So War Machine and Hordes has its own.
It's kind of a hot button issue at the minute in a lot of role playing, is that it is so white, middle class, cisgendered, male oriented.
Very true.
That actually it gives you the chance to explore diversity without having to make it about aliens and elves. You can be diverse in your game without it having to be about, those things are all like that because they are that species.
Yeah.
So if you want to have
good orcs,
evil elves, evil elves don't have to be black. They could just be elves that are evil. Or they don't have to be elves. They don't have to be elves at all. They could be a type of human that follows a particularly unpleasant religion. And as a result, it has this dedication to martial prowess that leads to them being very lithe and athletic.
There are ways to reskin those things. So you can take the basics and then plaster over them the elements of your setting that you're starting to build. But keep those core things, so you've got something to use. Cool. Okay. Well, I think that's some good advice, hopefully, for you guys on a system and rules that you want to use with this setting that you're building and the conversations you're having with your players. Our second half of this, we're going to talk about story. So now we've got an idea of where things are going on, who's going to be in it, what system and rules we're using. What's going on with the story? What's going on there? I think Ben, you had a few.
Yeah, I'm story overall when it comes to running a game. It's all got to be about the story, how the players fit in with it, what the story is that we're telling. You need to know what it is you're trying to say. Now, it doesn't mean that every story you tell has to be a morality tale. Not every game that you run has to be candlelit and with passing poetry to one another and and truly emoting the feelings of your character. But the story that you're trying to tell is vital. The players need to know that up front just as much as they need to know the setting.
Yeah.
If you're trying to tell a heist story, you need to tell players that you're going to be running a heist story, because if you want to run a heist story but you don't tell them that and you end up getting a bunch of law-abiding citizens, it's not going to be much of a heist.
Yeah.
So the tale that you tell needs to be transparent, while the actual telling of it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to pick a book, you go into a bookshop, you go to the section that has the books in that you want. You don't go looking in the sci-fi section for a romance novel.
No.
That doesn't mean that every sci-fi novel has no element of romance to it.
Yeah.
A good story has elements of every possible story within it, but it's got to have a main theme. It's got to have a main story. So if the story is about the sci-fi, you know that the romance angle is going to be secondary to that, but it's still going to come in.
Yeah.
That's important. You've got to have that basis so you know where it's going. And as you mentioned earlier on, before we started filming, knowing what side your players are on, sort of, you know, where they stand in relation to this. Are they proponents of it? Are they adversaries? Are they, which side of the rebellion are they fighting on? That kind of thing.
Are they aware of that conflict as starting characters as well? That's something that's really important. If as starting characters they're not aware of the wider conflict going on in the world they inhabit, then you've got to present it to them in a way that lets them make choices, preferably the choice you want them to make. But you certainly have to be presenting the information in a way that leads them in that direction.
Beforehand we were talking about Star Wars as the perfect model for this. Star Wars is pretty much always told as a game and as a story that we see on the screen as a pro-rebellion hero underdog story, with the player characters fighting the evil empire that is a vast monolithic thing. But there's been a lot recently, especially on the internet, which loves getting into this, where you look at how much of the empire isn't going to be evil. The people building the Death Star, not every single person there worked for Evil Contractors Incorporated.
No, exactly.
Not every
they pay well, though.
They do. That's true. Not every stormtrooper is a stormtrooper because they want to serve the cause of evil. Some of them might have become soldiers so that they can pay for their parents' medical bills.
And also, to their perspective, they're enforcing a system of law and structure that actually keeps
a structured legal system that keeps the galactic civilization
running smoothly.
They're perfectly running, protects it against external threats, threats that are coming from outside that galactic empire, threats that could potentially be even more devastating than...
Exactly, and that's one of the things we were talking about, wasn't it, in previous session, evil and what's something evil. In your Saturday morning cartoon show, as we've discussed, evil is big and looming, wears dark colours, has glowy eyes and probably a hood and a cape. It's immediately identifiable. It has an evil laugh, and it does things that are intrinsically bad from the outset. There are no good intentions in the behaviour of an evil character in that low-level, easily identifiable fashion. As you progress and evil characters get more mature and well-rounded and well-developed and more nuanced, actually the decisions they're making aren't necessarily with evil intentions.
No.
The outcomes may be evil, but their intentions, at least from their perspective,
are logical and
reasonable or even good. They even think that they're doing it for good reasons. And you look at comics. Comics are a great resource for that sort of thing. You've got characters like Dr. Doom, who's always considered as a supervillain. But actually, while his goal is to take over and rule the world, which to most people's mindset is an evil goal, his reason for doing it is because he thinks everyone else is doing a terrible job of it. He thinks he's far better qualified as a very intelligent individual to do a far better job. And if everyone else could just fall in line, then everyone would be happy and peace.
Of course.
So from his perspective, he is by no means a bad guy.
I mean,
he fights superheroes because they are in his way to achieving a goal that he thinks is for the betterment of his planet.
And if you look, talking about superheroes again, Civil War, the movie that's just come out, and the comic series, you know, good guys split down an ethical line, each seeing the other side as the bad guys.
Yeah.
But who's really
well,
the
actually,
bad
no,
guys?
they don't see each other as the bad guys. They don't see each other as bad guys. They see themselves as being split along a complete barrier that neither of them can cross.
Yes.
But acknowledging that both sides are still the good guys.
Yeah, but then they have to go and fight those guys to get there the obstacle to their goal.
Even in the fighting, it's all done reluctantly. Now, to answer an ages-old question, I watched The Watchmen the other day.
Oh, yes.
So there you go.
Yeah, you watched it.
Yeah, I did. So I watched Watchmen the other day, and I know the film has not had the greatest of reviews, particularly when compared to the comics. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it again the other day, and I was watching it and sort of analysing it a lot more this time as I watched it, and looking at the shades of grey it was. And every single character in that is a shade of grey.
Oh, yeah.
There's no black and white. There is no good and evil in it. No. Good people do bad things. Bad people do good things.
Yep.
The comedian who's...
spoilers, by the way.
Spoilers,
if you haven't seen Watchmen.
Yeah. You can't claim spoilers.
It's
been out for too long.
Yeah.
The comedian who's touted
DVD,
in many parts of it as a very bad guy is also consequently held up as an American hero at several points. And an integral part of closing down the Vietnam conflict. He fights crime on the streets. He's not a nice man. He's a criminal in many ways. Dr. Manhattan, who is true blue. At the same time, is so utterly divorced from humanity that concepts of right and wrong no longer hold meaning to him.
It's a really...
And there's been similar...
It's a very subtle story. It's got some...
Ozymandias, Adrian, couldn't possibly do those bad things because he has this deeply seated moral centre and is a vegetarian. And yet he is responsible for the deaths of millions because he sees it as the way to prevent the deaths of billions. So everybody makes these black and white choices that aren't. They're all shades of grey. And I think that shades of grey thing really plays into what you're trying to tell and the maturity of your story. Are you telling a very mature story where people make choices not because they're good or bad, but because of what function they serve?
And they're basing it on the information they have available to them at the time. They're making those choices as most people you could relate to would. They're making it based on what they feel is the right choice at the time. It doesn't make it an intrinsically bad decision or an evil decision. Those things. And when you've got a more experienced, probably more mature group of players and characters, then actually looking at your campaign overall, the evil influences should probably be less immediately obvious. They should be more insidious, more
subtle
and wider reaching and harder to identify early on.
So who's the evil in Game of Thrones?
Exactly.
At the beginning, you don't really know.
And even later on, I mean, it changes.
Whereas in the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, they pretty much telegraph it to you in the very first
in the intro.
The
guy's name's Venger.
But...
spoilers, by the way.
So you want spoilers for the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. The final episode, the one that was never made. If you've ever read the plot for that, which is available on the box set, you should go out and buy it. The plot for that is actually, it turns the entire story so far on its head, because it turns out that Venger isn't the bad guy. It's a good guy's body being piloted around by a bad guy spirit, and that actually Venger is this sort of uber paladin and an Avenger rather than just Venger, and that he'd been a hero all along, but that all of his goodness was locked away. And so all those evil choices that had been made in his body by someone else. So all of a sudden, that final episode would have made the whole story much more grown up, much more mature. And what you see in that episode is a split along the party, like you were talking about in Avengers, where half of the party decide to side with Venger because it's how they'll get home, and the other half oppose him
because of all the bad things he's
done. And in the end, it's the realization, the rationalization, and the resolving of that duality is what enables the kids to get home and to fix the Dungeons and Dragons world in their way out. So, how they relate to the world you need some conflict within your player group.
Yeah.
But that conflict should be resolvable.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't stop them working together. So if you've got a group of paladins and one person wants to play a chaotic evil assassin in that group, that's not going to work. But if you've got a group where you have got someone who is neutral evil and self-serving and kind of in it for themselves, but they'll go along with the greater good because it means they can get stuff out of it along the way, so be it. That actually puts a little bit of flavour into your game, gives it a bit of spice.
And then you can have two characters on almost opposing sides of the party brought together by the rest of that party of characters. You've got the paladin on one side and your self-interested chaotic evil assassin or rogue the other side, playing off with their counterpoint views as to why to do things, but often they'll actually want to do the same thing. If you're presenting the stories the right way, they will have different motivations for wanting the same outcomes.
I think in that situation the odds would have to be big enough that it would drive them together.
But equally,
so be careful with lumping chaotic evil characters and paladins into the same
there
party.
Will be disagreements.
But that's we're giving an extreme example to
at some point in the plot arc of any religious character, they need to have a crisis of faith.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's not the plot arc of a religious character. So there has to be that. And in every plot arc of the self-serving, miserly character, they need a flashback to what caused them to be that way, and then a choice: do they continue along that way, or do they turn over a new leaf, do the right thing, change their ways, and join the heroes?
Walk away from the pile of gold to save the
orphanage.
Save the orphanage.
With the dance
exactly.
Cool.
Always with a dance off.
Always with a dance
off. Always with a dance off. Okay, cool. Excellent. Right, so hopefully this episode has given you some insight into how the system and rules that you use with your setting and your growing campaign can influence what happens, and finding that balance between roleplay and rule play, and the story, how the players are going to interact with the story, what side of it they're going to be on. The shades of grey that we've been talking about can really add to the depth and the experience that your players will get out of it.
Well, Dungeons and Dragons, what am I saying? Lord of the Rings is an interesting one in there because it's split almost directly down a racial line, with orcs and goblins equals bad, humans, dwarves, elves equals good. But then if you look at the men of the South...
But there are also many neutral characters in that who are exclusively self-interested.
But it could be interesting to tell.
Mirkwood, they're only interested in themselves, and they're not interested in any form of greater good, only self-preservation.
But it would be interesting to tell a story from the point of view of some of the Southrons who go off to join the armies of Mordor.
There is actually a story online where Lord of the Rings is rewritten from the vantage point of someone in the army of Sauron, and how they're trying to bring order and structure and industry to the world. And yet the people of the old ways are fighting against them and resisting change and all that kind of thing. So you can see how these things can be played with. We can get a new experience out of it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully that episode's been useful for you and you got some tips out of it. Thanks again to Ben and Rich for coming into the dungeon to talk through these things. Please like and comment on the video below. If you've got any questions, thoughts, you completely disagree with us, put it in below. We'll come back to you. Subscribe to the channel so you can keep up on all the episodes that we put together, and hopefully we'll see you again in the dungeon.